Opposite to me is, personally, I would definitely put this as one of the best episodes in the series. As is definitely well known, of course, as the only episode where things seem to go really right for George. Um, I've mentioned in a couple of recent reviews we've done, there's episodes where it's like, oh, it's like three people, finish at the bottom, where one person finish up at the top. This one is kind of like in the middle. There's Kramer, who is kind of like left out of this, but he kind of ends up on the bottom of this, but he didn't have like one of the more big stories. The biggest loser in this episode, unfortunately, was Elaine. George came out of this with a big victory, and Jerry just remained even Steven, as it's called. Of course, it was a big turning point leading into the last 4 seasons of the series, of course, as it definitely ended a little bit of an era in the series for some things. So the episode starts off with George at the beach, looking out to the ocean, looking all depressed, which it's not the only time you'll see that happen, because it does happen again later in the series, when both Jerry and George both make big decisions. So he's looking depressed. Meanwhile, back at Pendant Publishing, Elaine is celebrating with Mr. Lippman as she is getting a big raise. And of course, she's like, she's on top of the world right now. Of course, though, the only little bad part about that scene was Lippman starts coughing, and she goes, "Oh, you gotta do something. You better do something about that cold." So Jerry meets Elaine for lunch, and George's supposed to be joining them also. And she's telling him how she got a big raise, and Jerry was shocked because he said he thought that Pendant Publishing was in financial trouble. But then Elaine said they're signing the papers. I guess they're going to be, merging with some Chinese company that's going to, help. That's going to definitely help them for sure. They're signing the papers next week. And also, Jerry is brought up that Elaine has gotten back together with Jake Jarmel, who was the guy who she broke up with over exclamation points and punctuation, of course. So they got back together, but she said it's seeming pretty serious, and they've been talking about moving in together. So, of course, all seems to be going great for Elaine. Then comes in George, who sits down and is all depressed, saying how nothing's working out for him, and how his life is the total opposite of everything he ever wanted. So, they go to place their order. The waitress walks over, and she sees George and goes, "Tuna on toast," because she knows his order. And then he's like, "Yeah, sure." And he goes, wait a minute. He goes, "I always get tuna on toast. Nothing goes right when I do tuna on toast." He goes, "How about this time I get chicken salad, and like a bunch of, and like on rye, with rye toast, and a cup of tea." I think there was something else that was involved with it too. I can't remember. So she walks away, and then Elaine happens to notice that a woman was looking over at George. And then they're like, "Go talk to her." And then George's like, "What are you thinking? Women aren't fascinated by bald men who are unemployed, got no money, and live with their parents." And then Jerry admits that, as a character, he was kind of like, said this to George in like a jagged way, like, "Yeah, you should do this." But of course, George ends up being serious and going along with it. So that's what he mentions, well, here's your chance to do the opposite. So instead of a tuna on toast and not going up to her, chicken salad and going over to talk to her. And then and George's like, "Yeah, I should really do the opposite." Because then Jerry says, and again, he's just jacking him. He goes, "Because if every instant you think is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right." And then all of a sudden, George gets a light bulb, and he's like, "Yeah, you're right. I will do the opposite. I used to sit here and do nothing and regret it for the rest of this. Now I will do the opposite, and I will do something." So he gets up, walks over to the woman, and says, "I couldn't help but notice that you were looking in my direction." And she goes, "Oh, yeah, I just realized I overheard you ordering the same exact lunch as I do." And George just gets straight to the point and says it. "My name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents." And the woman just smiles and go, "I'm Victoria, hi." And shocker, the woman is into George. Just because he did the opposite. Instead of just, just lying and, backing off, he just goes up and tells her straight to the point. "My name is George, I'm unemployed, and I live with my parents." Which is stuff, of course, I had to work around whenever I was trying dating apps before I got a more solid job. "My name is Mike. I'm inconsistently employed, and I live with my parents." That's how it was until I finally met my lovely girlfriend. Now I always raved that things are going really well between us. Of course, it's going to be much better than Elaine and Jake Jarmel because of what happens later. But, so, what also was good about Pendant Publishing getting this merger is the fact that Kramer's coffee table book about coffee tables was going to go through. And Kramer was to be going on some book tours, and he was selected to be on Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee Gifford. And he appears on the show, and things seem to be going good. He also shows how his coffee table book can become a coffee table as well. And they're talking about the book, but then Kramer, of course, takes a sip of his drink, spits it out, gets all over Kathy Lee's dress. And because of that, Lippman decides to not have Kramer do any more shows. So that gets taken away from Kramer. Then Elaine gets a surprise visit from her old roommate Tina, who I guess, had been not living with Elaine for a little bit, but I guess someone else was kind of renting out her space. Tina, though, comes by and tells Elaine, first, hold on, back up. I forgot one story, gotta get to that first. The first bad news that Elaine gets is she went to the movies, and she received a message being told that Jake got into a car accident and he was in the hospital. But before she left, she was right by the concession stand. She grabs a box of Juji fruits. She goes to the hospital to visit Jake, and as they're talking, she's just eating the Juji fruits, acting like it's no big deal. But of course, Jake catches Elaine off guard, and she says that she got the Juji fruits at the theater right after she was told about Jake's accident. Jake was upset, though, saying it's like, you knew I was in the hospital and you thought it was fine to just stop and grab a snack? In which he basically told her, get out, I don't want to talk to you, and that basically ended to that. So there's one for Elaine right there. Then Elaine, if I get to it now, Elaine gets told by her ex-roommate Tina she's getting kicked out of her apartment and she needs to be out by the end of the month. So, and then George goes on a date with Victoria. They go to the they were driving to it. They do the opposite. Instead of just they had to swerve around a bad driver, but instead of George stopping and telling the guy off, he goes, "Now it'll be necessary. We're gonna keep going." They get to the movies. These people were kicking the seats and being obnoxious during the movie, and George gets up and just starts yelling at them, saying, "Shut your traps and stop kicking the seats. We're trying to watch the movie." And he just basically tells them, "If you don't settle down, I'm going to take it out and show you what it's like." Which apparently, that and a couple other lines Jerry got from these outbursts done by Buddy Rich, who I guess was a comedian but he would have these segments with bands, and they're yelling. He'd be like this, has these lines of rage and pure obscurity that he liked to reference. So there was a couple of them I know in future episodes, but this is the first one I believe that Jerry mentioned that they did. And then, of course, at the end of the night, Victoria invites him upstairs, and he's like, "Nah, I don't think so. I don't want to do that right now. Not quite yet. I don't want to take it too fast." And then Victoria's like, "Who are you, George Costanza?" And George goes, "I'm the opposite of every guy you'll ever meet in your life." And then there's Jerry. Jerry um, had a had a show get canceled, but then immediately gets a call for a show that to do the same time as for same pay that it got canceled for. Then I think something about he lost his food or something like that, but then he got a chicken salad, somewhere else, and then he was playing poker and he broke even. To which Kramer tells him that he is even Steven. And then, of course, Elaine comes in, and she's freaking out because everything's going downhill because she's getting kicked out of her apartment. And the fact that Jake, got upset with her and broke up with her because she stopped for Juji Fruits. And then Jerry mentions him being even Steven. So Elaine tests it out by having Jerry give her $20. She throws the $20 out the window. And then George comes in, says he found $20, even though it's the $20 that Jerry and Elaine threw out the window. But then George just raving about, how, great everything was going, how great his date was with Victoria, and how he did the opposite, and everything was just falling right into place. And then he mentions that her uncle works for the Yankees and is giving him a job interview for assistant to the traveling secretary. And he's just like, this has been a dream come true. He goes, and he starts raving that this whole thing of him doing the opposite is his own religion or whatnot, as he's saying. So then, he goes to the interview, and, he basically answers the questions that Victoria's uncle asked him. Then he gets introduced to Steinbrenner, who, of course, we do not see on camera. We'll get to Steinbrenner at the end when I get to the trivia. George basically tells off Steinbrenner, saying how he's just disgusted how, he's treated the Yankees for the past 20 years. But off of him being honest, Steinbrenner just says, hire this man. So when George meets up with Jerry later to tell him about, him getting a job, he's like, what? Ruth? Gehrig? DiMaggio? Costanza? All in that category. And he's all excited, and then he's saying how also he's going to be moving out of his parents' house and moving into to an apartment, and how everything's going so great for him. Then Elaine, of course, comes in. She's just miserable because everything's like falling downhill for her. And then George makes a joke like, "Why don't you move in with my parents?" And then Elaine basically gets all tough and just like, "Was that the opposite, or was that your natural instinct?" And as she grabbed George's face and made the fist flip, George was like, instinct. And then Elaine says, stick with the opposite. So then, I think the only other stuff that's left, Lippman, George moves out of his parents, which, he tells them he loves them very much and they mean a lot to him. And then Jerry's like, yeah, that's the opposite. Jerry then is still dating Rachel Goldstein. She breaks up with him, and Jerry's like, oh, no worry, I'll meet somebody else. Now, it wasn't shown in the actual final edit, but in a deleted scene, Jerry leaves the restaurant, and all George's like, oh, well, I'll meet somebody else. It's been nice dating you for a while, and good luck. And Rachel's like, okay, because she was about to break up with him, saying, it's just, I've been thinking, I don't think we should see each other anymore. And Jerry's like, oh, no big deal, I'll meet someone else. And, of course, in the deleted scene, he walks out and runs into a woman named Julie, and he's like, and Jerry's like, what do you know? Everything always just evens out for him. But then there's Elaine, who, it was the day that Chinese company was coming to sign the papers for the merger with them and Pendant Publishing. Lippman, though, still had that really bad cold, and it's gotten worse as he's sneezing left and right. So he's telling Elaine that he's getting ready to go to this meeting, and, if it wasn't for the merger, they'd be doomed. But he walks away, but he leaves his handkerchief on Elaine's desk. But Elaine just took a big gulp of Juji Fruits. But, of course, she's trying to say, Mr. Lippman, you forgot your handkerchief, but of course, because she had so many in her mouth, she couldn't talk clearly. Lippman walks away, doesn't hear her. He's walking to his office, and the Chinese people are waiting for him. Lippman sneezes outside, but then realizes he lost his handkerchief, but it's too late. they recognize him, and he says, "I'm sorry, I can't shake your hands. I have germs right now." He didn't just say, "I have a cold." He says, "I have germs," which leads to the Chinese not going through with the deal, and Pendant Publishing is out of business. Elaine loses her apartment, she loses her boyfriend, and she lost her job. Just like that, all in one episode. After she started off so great at the beginning of the episode, getting that big raise, and she was in a serious relationship, talking about moving in with Jake Jarmel, all gone just like that. And of course, that also means Kramer's coffee table about coffee tables is definitely not getting published now. So, I still love this scene, how Elaine is freaking out about all this. Then she says, "Can't you see what happened? What's going on here? I become George." And Jerry's like, "Don't say that." She's like, "It's true. I'm George. I'm George." And what's funny is that she's wearing her glasses too, so her facial expressions make it even more funnier, because it's like she's basically looks like George. And then George comes in with a suit, just like, all like in a great mood because everything's going right for him. He's talking about how he had a conversation with Don Mattingly and all this jazz. And that's how the show went off the air. A lot of behind the scenes trivia about this episode. Like I said, there was the line back in the theater when George yelled at those kids who were kicking the seats and yelling, and then George telling them off, basically telling them, if you don't sit, I'm going to take you outside, I'm going to show you what it's like. Again, that was a line that was taken from Buddy Rich, which I always get mixed up. Him and there's a character in Family Matters called Buddy Goodrich. I can think, oh, that's probably the same people, but it's like, no, it's not the same people. But there was 3 other lines of rage and obscurity that they had taken from Buddy Rich that were used in future episodes. They originally actually almost wanted to call this episode The Even Steven, but no offense, Jerry being Even Steven was not, the biggest takeaway of the story. It was definitely the opposite. You'll remember this episode for George doing the opposite and things going right for him. Yes, Jerry being Even Steven was unique, but it wasn't a standout. Of course, the other thing is, so this, I said at the beginning of this review, this episode basically marked the end of an era in the Seinfeld series. It basically marked Elaine, who lived in the same apartment building, had the same job for the first 5 seasons. She loses all of that. Is going to be starting off new, fresh in season 6, which I believe is when she works for Mr. Pitt. George, meanwhile, had gone 3 seasons of being unemployed, well, besides whenever he wrote the pilot, but 3 seasons of being unemployed, struggling to find work, and also 1 season of living with his parents. So this is kind of a new start for him as well. Now Kramer, he didn't get his coffee table about coffee tables, another business transaction that just didn't go over smoothly. Now, of course, also there is the whole backstory about George Steinbrenner. As of course, since George, for all except for the final season, George works for the Yankees for the rest of the series, for the next 3 seasons. And of course, the problem with those, they wanted, of course, have the real George Steinbrenner there, because this whole story about George working for the Yankees was just, George Larry David having this fantasy about working for the Yankees growing up, which never happened, but he gave it to George anyway. They originally tried to get the real George Steinbrenner to be in the series. Didn't work out. So they had to reenact Steinbrenner, but had to get Steinbrenner's permission to do so. At first, things weren't going through until Jerry talked to Steinbrenner, because apparently Steinbrenner thought that they were making fun of him because George was called George. Now, in season 6, we actually see a figure. This episode we just saw a shadow, and Larry David voicing Steinbrenner. They had Larry voice Steinbrenner because Larry was just hilarious, doing the voice whenever they're trying to figure out what it sounded like. And after how good Larry was, Jerry was like, "Why don't you just do the voice?" Which Larry David's done like a voiceover for several things, or has been like a stand-in for several things as well. But he actually, this is probably his biggest role he had for on screen, was the voice of George Steinbrenner. Of course, in season 6, we actually get introduced to what they did. Whenever George went to go see Steinbrenner's office. But yeah, apparently at first, Steinbrenner wasn't going to let them, reenact him because they thought they were making fun because George is called George. Now, there is an episode, though, in the future where they actually do have the real Steinbrenner appear in a deleted scene, but it hit the cutting room floor, unfortunately. It didn't make the final cut. But that's for another time. And for that, guys, that's the opposite. That is season 5 of Seinfeld. Another really good season, of course. Season 6 will be in the next series. In the next videos that we do, of course, we do hit the highlight of 100 episodes in season 6. I do believe we see some Seinfeld imitations, like those cartoons. A couple of my favorite episodes, like The Switch and The Race, are in season 6. A lot to look forward to, of course, in season 6. As again, George and Elaine are going to be on fresh starts, with George working for the Yankees and living in his own apartment. Elaine kind of starting from scratch again. We'll find out next, though, when we get to season 6. So, guys, that's season 5. That's the opposite. What were your guys' thoughts on the opposite episode? Have you guys gone that philosophy, saying that anything you do is wrong, and the opposite would have to be right? And also, what were your thoughts on season 5, of course? Did you think it was better than season 4? I don't know. It's tough to determine. Both season 4 and 5 were really good. Season 6, though, is pretty good as well. I do look forward to season 6 as well. So be sure to leave the guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. Be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content to my channel, and follow me on Twitter at DemandAirboy93. Till then, guys, I'm checking out. I'll see you guys in season 6. Have a great rest of your evening. Peace out, everybody.